All right, if you got a Bible, turn into it to, just put your finger in Matthew. We're going to be there. We're also going to be in Luke. If you have YouVersion, you can just drop into YouVersion, click on the Live tab on the left, and you'll see Beach Baptist show up. All your notes and Bible verses are printed there. You can add on to notes, keep your own notes, save it to your own stuff. Also send out prayer requests. If you got prayer requests going on today, that's the best and easiest way to get prayer requests into the system. If you'll put it in there, we get a mass email that goes out to our prayer chain, and then we can pray right along with you for whatever it is you're praying for today. Last week we talked a little bit about following. It's really cool when we talk about something in here in Big Church, and then through the week somebody will just bring it up, or they'll say stuff like, "I'm following," I'm just a follower, or whatever that is. And that's what we talked about last week, was following Christ and kind of what it looks like. And so we're going to continue a little bit of that today, because we believe here that that's what you're supposed to be doing right now, following Christ. That's the crux of Christianity. All right, it's not the stuff you and I do. It's not what our life looks like necessarily that makes us followers. Being followers is what makes the rest of our life look the way it does. And there is a big difference there. So we discovered a couple things last week. First thing we discovered was that being a sinner does not, this is loud. Is it loud? It sounds loud to me. I'm just afraid to get excited if it's too loud. Anyway, being a sinner does not disqualify you from being a follower of Jesus. It's actually a prerequisite. Everybody that started following Jesus was a sinner. Everybody that starts following Jesus now is a sinner. Everybody who starts following Jesus is totally different than he is, okay? Christians don't start following Jesus. That doesn't make any sense. You have to be someone who has no clue who Jesus is to start following him. All right? To even find him, you have to not know who he is. So sinners makes it's a prerequisite. And the only people who Jesus ever invited to follow him were the people who would have been the most unlikely to be chosen. Did you remember growing up, were you one of the kids who was the last picked for the dodgeball team? Yeah, me too. Yeah, my mom used to buy my clothes at like Kmart or something, so everybody's like, "Yeah, you're not good." Yeah, that could have been it. Maybe it was her clothes. Maybe it was my clothes. I don't know. Maybe it was just the fact that I was a nerd. I don't know. But it was the most unlikely. But that's who Jesus picked. He would take the people that everybody else would have picked last, and he picked them first. That's just weird thing about Jesus. Listen, you understand that more than you really want to admit. Because the less likely a person is to have been chosen by Jesus, when they walk into our church or when they walk into your life and they want to start following Jesus, you immediately say, I don't know. You don't look like Jesus material to me. Think thief on the cross. Have you ever said, "Wow, how unfair"? Thief on the cross, lives his whole life and then gets to go to heaven on his last moment. Think deathbed conversion. You ever heard those? Oh yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, you're going to find Jesus now, aren't you? You ever kind of thought that? How unfair. That just can't be right. Can't be right. How about prison confessions? Oh, of course you're going to follow Jesus now. You're locked up. You ever said something like that? I hear those stories all the time. Those are the people that's why I say you understand that, because whenever you hear stories like that, you're sort of bent to go, no, not them. No, if they were going to follow Jesus, they should have done it before they screwed up. And that's how we kind of think sometimes, Bubba. And that's just not right. Me and you, as Christians, are sometimes some of the most ignorant people on the planet. I mean, we really screw up. Second thing we did was having unbelief or being an unbeliever doesn't disqualify you from following Jesus. Nobody who followed Jesus in the first century was a believer. Nobody believed he was the Son of God. His 12 disciples, they were the biggest skeptics in the world. Still are. They didn't get it. They never kind of got 2 years into it. It was before Matthew finally went, "Oh, yeah, I know who you are." Peter, way into the ministry before he's like, "I know who you are. Okay, now I'm starting to get it." You don't have to believe everything in order to follow Jesus. It doesn't make sense to say that you have to know everything before you can follow him. Jesus doesn't want you to be an expert in Jesusville before you start following him. That doesn't make any sense to him. He wants you to follow before you know or understand anything. All those people was like, oh, he's a nice guy. He healed my mother-in-law, healed my daughter, raised my brother from the dead, fed us. I mean, who wouldn't follow him? If you feed people, they'll follow you. Kind of like cats. You didn't have to have this massive belief to follow Jesus around. And neither do you today have to get it all right. All the time people are like, well, I just don't know enough yet. You're the prime candidate to follow Jesus. You're it. He wants you who know nothing to follow him. The people he had the biggest problem with were those who said they knew everything about him, who knew everything about religion or about the church. He had nothing to do with those guys. He wants the people who know nothing. He wants people like I just prayed, who will be clay, who will understand that he wants to change them and mold them into his being. He wants those people. Maybe you got a problem with this. He's 100% man and 100% God. Maybe you can't compute that. The whole divinity thing. Cool. Keep following. Just keep following. None of those people believed he was the Son of God. You might be here today and go, I don't know about the whole God thing with Jesus. Fine. Keep following. Don't stop following. You can start to edge toward Jesus before you really believe all the stories. You can be reading the New Testament and get to something that goes, it's a little outlandish. I don't know that I believe that. Cool. Keep following. Keep reading. Don't stop. You've started. Don't stop. Today we're talking about next steps. You've kind of you've got the momentum moving towards Jesus a little bit. You ain't got it all. That's fine. Next steps is where we're at today. But nobody believed that right stuff initially. They just kind of followed him around. They felt compelled to follow him, and they did as much as they could. He was a teacher. He stopped and he taught all the time. They would just soak it up. People would come from everywhere and just kind of listen to what he had to say, just kind of soak it up. And the last thing we learned last week was that invitation was not his invitation to them and to you is not a religious invitation. Okay, all the world religions invite you to join them. Here's their prerequisite: change and then join. Change who you are. Change the way you act. Change the way you talk, change the way you believe, change everything about you, then join us. Jesus came along and said, no. Join me, and then you'll change. Follow me around, and then you'll change. You'll become different. You'll be following me, and he said sometime in the future, you'll probably look in the mirror, and you'll go, I don't recognize that person. I feel different than I did when this whole thing started. I'm starting to act a little. I'm starting to. Why should I? This is weird. And Jesus is like, that's right. Just follow me. We'll worry about the rest of the stuff later. You might be here today, and that's why you drop out of church. People drop out of church a lot because they don't fit in to the religious cycle. They don't look like the rest of the church people. And the church people are the worst about making them that way, but you try, and you just can't get over the hump. You try to come to church all the time, and you miss half the time, so you start to feel bad. You hear us talking about people volunteering to help and kids or whatever it is, and you're like, man, you know what? I just can't. I try and try. I'd really like to, but I've tried it. I don't like kids, or I've tried it, but I'm too busy. I've tried it. So you just kind of drop out of everything. That's too hard, so I can't seem to fit in. It's not what Jesus is asking you to do. Jesus is asking you to follow him. And over time, the rest of you will change. And then you'll be able to do the things that it seems like everybody else is doing. Maybe you're here today because you dropped out a long time ago, and you're like, man, maybe it was like you went to church camp. You're like, I really need to get back into that. I'm going to have to get back to church. My life is really screwed up right now. I know I need to be in church. Well, you need to hold on to your horses a little bit. And maybe by the end of the service today, you might change your mind about that. Because coming here in an effort because you've changed or in an effort to fix yourself won't work. It won't work. You're going to last for a little while. You're going to be blowing and going. You're like, oh man, okay, you'll be like Scott Nelson, okay? You'll be out painting the whole outside of the church in one day. I can do it. But if your motivation is just to change, you'll peter out and you'll be like, phew, wow, can't do this anymore. It's too tough. It's too tough. And if he was, I'm tooting his horn a little bit. You're not allowed to clap, but I'm going to toot his horn a little bit. You know, he painted, him and Don painted with some help, a little bit of help, the whole outside of the church yesterday. I mean, the whole building, outside. You know, if he'd have stopped, I know why he did it. But if he'd have done it, looked around and said, dude, we should have, could have used like 10 more people. I don't know where everybody else is at. Church needs to get off their butt and come help, and he'd have never made it. He didn't. Put his head down, and church. And that's what Jesus is kind of asking you to do. Put your head down and follow me. You've accepted the invitation. Now let's go. Let's go. Let's just go. Don't worry about everybody else. Go. Follow me. Follow me. And I know that was a really kind of cheesy explanation, but okay. You're not going to change because of discipline. You're not because you decided to change, not because you think it's good. But listen, you can't help but change because people in close proximity to Jesus ultimately always change. You won't be able to help but change if you're actually with Christ. The only way for you to not change, step away from him. You're surrounded, if you're here and you're kind of thinking that way, you're surrounded by a bunch of people who'll tell you a story. They'll tell you a story that they started following Jesus, and they'll tell you that change was gradual. I'll tell you that I accepted Christ at a very young age, and if that had been it for me, wouldn't have happened. Change is gradual. Change is a process. Growing in Christ is a process. You've got to be around him a whole lot for stuff to rub off on you, all right? Does that make sense? Y'all ready to go to the beach? Tough, we're not going. Beach is closed today. Bottom line, here's your question. Am I following? Am I following? Not, am I going to church consistently? How many Bible verses do I know? Am I doing all I can do? Am I volunteering all the time I possibly can? But am I following him? Not am I behind everybody else in the following department. You seem to be doing a whole lot, but I can't seem to do any. You seem to be all you know about God and the Bible, but I can't seem to get any verses memorized. No, am I following? That's the question. And true Jesus followers ask that question every single day when they get up. Am I following him today? Am I following him right now? In some shape, form, or fashion, am I currently, intentionally following Jesus? That's the question you must ask. That's the question that must drive your daily life. Am I following him? We're going to look at a new story this week. Last week we looked at Matthew's conversion and him getting up and following. And you're going to think that if you heard last week, you're going to think, okay, that's different. That's completely opposite of what you said last week when I tell you about this week. You got to read them together, okay? And you got to put the stories together and understand what Jesus is doing when he's calling out his disciples. And then it'll kind of make sense. You know, we have 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John in the Bible. They come from 4 different perspectives, okay? Matthew, he was a direct eyewitness of Jesus. He walked, he talked. Jesus walked up, like we saw last week, to his tax collector booth and said, I'd like for you to follow me now. And Matthew said, okay. And he did. And he followed him around for about 3 years. Then we have Mark. He spent a lot of time with Peter, who spent a lot of time with Jesus. So Mark got all of his stories from Peter, and then he told us the story of the gospel. He told us Jesus' story from Peter's perspective. All right, then we have Luke. Luke says he investigated a whole bunch of people. He heard stories. He didn't believe them. Luke was one of your, if you're like, I got trouble with believing, Luke's your guy. You need to read Luke because Luke says, listen, I went and interviewed everybody. I checked this story out completely. Now I'm going to write the story. So he spent time with every apostle that he could possibly find, and then he wrote a story. And then we have John, who was an eyewitness as well. So we have 2 eyewitnesses, one who really dug into his witnesses, and then one who interviewed Peter specifically to get a story. So we got all these different angles, these 4 different story angles from and it's the same story. I love it when people go, well, it can't be true because they all didn't tell the same story. Can you imagine reading the same story 4 times? Exactly the same way? What'd be the point? What'd be the point? God gave it to us so we can have it from a different angle. So today's story, both Matthew and Luke tell it. And we're going to read Matthew's version first, real short. And that's just kind of how Matthew was. Matthew was a Jewish guy. He wrote to primarily Jewish people who had big faith. The Jewish people already came to church. They already understood what they were supposed to do. They kind of got it going on. So Matthew just gave them a quick little synopsis of it. It was brief, but it leaves you with a very unrealistic expectation of how you should follow Jesus. If you just read the Matthew account of him calling out these guys, you'll go, I can't do that. That's ridiculous. I'm glad they had the faith, but I don't. So then we're going to look at Luke's version, and we'll kind of flesh it out, and then I think you'll find more. So let's read Matthew's first. And then so it starts in Matthew 4, verse 18, and here it says, as Jesus was walking by the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, called Peter, and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. Duh, that's what they do, okay? Then he said, verse 19, come follow me, Jesus said, and I will send you out to fish for people. And at once they left their nets and followed him. What? They're sitting there working, catching fish, middle of a boat, got their net, or they just got done, whatever's going on. And the story says that Jesus says, hey, quit working, let's go. And it was like, let's go. They just drop everything, take off. Kind of crazy sounding, isn't it? To me it is. Verse 21. Going on from there, he saw two other brothers, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. They were in a boat with their father Zebedee, preparing their nets. Jesus called them, and immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. In the story. Can you imagine James and John? Dad, the guy in the sandals? Yeah, we're going with him. Tell Mom we said bye. Good luck with the family business. That's kind of what you're like, what? Who can do that? If you're just a normal guy, you're a plumber, and you're like, if I read the Bible, I got to quit plumbing. If you're an electrician, I got to quit electrifying. I just got to quit what I'm doing and follow Jesus. I got to go put on, and then you marry that with John the Baptist, I got to put on some sackcloth and ashes and eat locust and honey to be a Jesus follower. Not what it says. Well, that's what this says. This is exactly what happened. It's just not everything that happened. There's some more. Remember, Matthew just thought, you know what, that's the gist of it. The Jews would have read that and went, okay, good Christian boys. And sometimes you and I read that story, and that's what we think. Man, they had some strong faith. Man, I wish I had it like that. Let's read the rest of it. You ever heard this? If he's not Lord of all, he's not Lord at all. And that's kind of how that's preached sometimes. You need to drop it all. You need to give it all to you. You just need, because if you can't do it, he's not going to touch any part of your life if he's not going to touch all of your life. Not cool. Because a lot of people just go, you know what? I'll just go with not at all then. I can't get to that point in my life, so I'm just going to have to go with not at all. And they drop off. They kind of got started. That's what they read. And can't do it. Then Luke comes along, and he's writing to people like you and people like me. He's writing to Gentiles, people who don't have a big faith. They need a little more information before they wave goodbye to Mom and Dad. They want to hear, as Paul Harvey would say, the rest of the story. So Luke gives us this detail, and he starts his whole gospel with saying, I researched it. Here's exactly what happened. Check this out. And let me show you that first pic. This is the area we're talking about that Jesus worked in. That's Jesus' ministry area right there. Sea of Galilee's right up there at the top, second little blue thing from the top. First you need to understand, that's pretty big. It's not as big as the Dead Sea, but it's pretty big. It's 60 square miles. It's 18 miles by 9 miles. You could see across it, but you couldn't see down it. Okay, so it's a lot bigger. Everything Jesus did started in that area. You see Jerusalem, second, third, bottom of the screen there. That's Jerusalem. That's kind of where epicenter. But that's it. That's all. That's everything started right there, and the rest of the world got changed. Right there. That ought to give some credence to your life. Okay? I don't know how much you've traveled in your life. Maybe you should stick it on a map somewhere and see how much you traveled and see how much gospel you've spread. Because Jesus started right there, spread around like that, and the whole world got saved because of it. That wasn't because he was God. I'm sorry. That's because he did what God had him to do. That part of his life, you can mimic. You can be a minister in your area doing what you're supposed to do, following Christ, and the world can get touched. You can drink a cup of coffee. Shameless plug for coffee. You can drink a cup of coffee and actually change people across the planet. I'm not going to tell you all about that. You can go back here and check it out. You're like, here goes Luke's version, verse 5. Oh, no, one more. The Sea of Galilee, this is what it looks like. That's the 9-mile version, but it's taken about halfway in. And that's one of the little wooden boats that are out in the Sea of Galilee. Listen, if you want to be a really good Christian, you'll go over there and you'll rent that boat. That's a boat for rent on the Sea of Galilee. They'll take you out. Christians love doing that. They take it out because a lot of the stories happen there. And I heard this one story about this group that went out and they played Chris Tomlin songs on that boat right there because the rental companies are like, only Christians are coming. That's the only people who's going to do it. But they get out on this boat, and I read about this one preacher who, Andy Stanley, went on this cruise. And he says, we went out on the boat, and it's like these guys were really over-the-top Christians. And they kept looking at us like we needed to get saved if we were going to be out on the Sea of Galilee. But he said they got out in the middle, and they always stop, and they have devotion, and it was really kind of cool. He said, but then this guy poured a bottle of water out on the deck of the boat and then walked on it. Said, look, I'm walking on the water on the Sea of Galilee. And he was like, don't y'all want to do it? No, we don't. We don't really want to do that. But so if you really want to be a good Christian, you'll go and you'll rent that boat. And no, that's just shameless plug. But that's what Sea of Galilee, those mountains, that's the 9-mile mark over there across it. So that's kind of what we're talking about looking. So here's what Luke says happened right on this side of the sea. It's a sea, not a pond, not a lake. It's a sea, pretty big. Here he says, Luke 5, verse 1. One day, as Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, which is also the Sea of Galilee, Matthew could have told us a little bit more about that. The people were crowding around him and listening to the word of God. So Jesus is not just standing by the lake like this going, pretty water, I think I'll get somebody to follow me. No, he's standing there, he's teaching, and he's at the edge of the lake, and people are crowding him, so much so that he's probably starting to stand in mud. He's like, people are getting closer and closer because that's what happens. When Jesus talks, people listen. E.F. Hutton has nothing on him, all right? So these people are crowding around him. There's more going on. He's standing there preaching, and people are listening to God. And that's an important word, the word listening, because following Jesus always begins with information. Always. With listening. Nobody has ever been living, sitting in their house or their apartment, woke up one day, having never heard anything about Jesus going, I think I want to follow Jesus. Never heard a story. They've always listened to information first. Jesus did it. People listened to what he had to say, and then they would follow. He didn't say, now, it wasn't like, leave your world, leave your lifestyle, start following. And there are religions out there today that'll tell you, don't ask questions, just follow. Don't ask questions to follow. Have you ever been around that? Run away. Stay away. Because Jesus would invite you to ask as many questions you possibly can, because real Christianity is built on truth. It's built on teaching. It's built on listening and learning, not blind faith. That's not what Christianity is built on. It bugs me when somebody goes, well, I'm just doing it. Why? I don't know. What? Not Jesus didn't tell me to. No, I'm just doing it. I don't understand why. People down at the church, they said I needed to. No. Jesus would not have you be a blind faith follower. Jesus always built people's faith. He built it. That's why he says your faith is going to grow. If it's not going to grow, why didn't he just give it to you grown? He builds it. We learn. It starts with listening. So he stands at the edge of the sea. People are crowding around. There's no stage. There's no lights. There's no crowd control. There's nobody like, shh, listen up, Jesus is talking. No, he's just teaching, and people are massive. And in verse 2 he says, he saw at the water's edge 2 boats left there by the fishermen who were washing their nets. See, when you read Matthew, you're kind of like, oh, they're out there fishing. They hear what's... No, he saw 2 boats sitting there, and Simon, he's washing his net. What would happen is they had just fished the night before. Okay, so they're net fishing. If you don't know anything about fishing, if you're going to fish with a net, you wait till the fish are close enough to get into the net. Okay, that's nighttime when the water's cool. They come to the top. You can net them up. Doesn't do any good to go out there when they're in the deep water because it's too hot at the top. So they're washing their nets because they went out and fished at night. Okay, so they've got them strung up in between some poles, and they're picking off the beer cans and the Grippo's potato chip bags and all that stuff, and they're pulling the seaweed out of it. And so they're playing with their nets, and Jesus is over here, and there's a big crowd. Jesus is teaching, the crowd's listening. They're washing and cleaning their nets, and they're listening. It's a big church gathering. Some are drinking coffee. Some are doing whatever they do, but they're listening to what Jesus has to say. All right, so verse 3, he got in, so he sees the boat sitting there. Verse 3 says, he got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, and asked him to put out a little from shore. Now, we know, I believe, that the conversation probably went a little different, to get to that point. He probably said, hey, Simon, can I inconvenience you a little bit? Can I borrow your boat? Now, we don't know if Peter tied a line on it, pushed Jesus out in the boat, or if Peter got in the boat with him and rowed out a little bit and kind of kept the boat still. But we know Jesus borrowed Simon's boat. So he probably called over and said, hey, one of you, which one of these boats yours? Peter, that one right there. One with the gold stuff on the top, because we're good. Can I borrow it? Yeah, why not? The Bible said, then he sat down and taught the people from the boat. Why did he keep teaching? Because faith comes from hearing. Following begins with listening. Faith is built around content and getting your questions asked. Finding out about this thing before you jump off. Verse 4, when he had finished speaking, he said to Simon. Now, he could have said anything, right? I mean, he could have said, hey, did you like that sermon? What do you think? Is it good enough? Let's go. Why don't you just follow me? He could have said that. He could have said, we said amen. You want to walk down the aisle? Let's shake my hand. Let's go. We can get busy. He didn't. He didn't say that. Instead, he said, put out into deep water and let down the nets for a catch. Now, this is kind of important. He asked Peter to do something that Peter had done 100 times before, but he simply asked him to do it in a different way. He asked him to do it his way, a way that he'd never done it before, a way that had never happened before. There's two problems. I don't know if you catch it or not, but if you're Peter, you've got a couple of problems with this. Jesus, we just cleaned and dried the nets. We just finished doing what it is we do when you're finished doing what you've asked me to go do. I mean, we're done. We've done what you're asking me to go do. We did it all night long. That's problem number one. Second problem, this is not an easy endeavor. It's not, I'll grab my pole. I'm ready. No, the nets are rolled up. They've got to take them, unroll them, put them back up on the poles on the boat, get it ready to go back out fishing again. It's an inconvenience. Peter, I borrowed your boat. Let's go fishing. Peter, can we go fishing? Can we? Now, Peter's respectful. Jesus is a rabbi. There's a bunch of rabbis around. But this guy's pretty good. This guy, when he speaks, people he's getting the biggest crowds, and people are starting to see different things happen from him. So Peter's respectful. He says, all right, verse 5, Simon answered, Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything. Anything. We did it the way we're supposed to do it at night and caught nothing. Now you're asking me to do it the way we're not supposed to do it. You see your logic? Anybody else got some logic like that when it comes to Jesus asking you to do something? But we're doing it the way we're supposed to do it, the way everybody else does it, and it's not being successful. Why would I do it a totally different way? Why would I do that? Doesn't make any sense. Jesus says, let's go fishing when you aren't supposed to go fishing. Let's go catch some fish when everybody says there's no way you're going to catch any fish. Jesus didn't say, I'm not asking you to leave the family business. I'm not asking you to drop your boats off at the rental agency and let them take it over. I'm not asking you that. I'm asking you, will you take me fishing? Peter could have been thinking, carpenter. Really? What do you know about fishing? I mean, seriously. That's something you could say. But Jesus, you don't know anything about plumbing. You don't do it that way. You don't know anything about electricity. You don't do it that way. There's a process that we go through. You don't know anything about building, Jesus. Well, he would know about building. Sorry. You don't know about the way I do things, God. You don't know how it is here. That's not the way you do it, God. Why are you asking me to do it the way you don't do it? And not only that, Jesus, look at the crowd you've got here. If I push off of here with my nets up like I'm going fishing in the middle of the day, people are going to think I'm crazy. People are going to think I done lost it all, taking the preacher fishing in the middle of the day. What good do you have on the boat? What was at stake? Whether Peter thought he could trust Jesus or not. That's what was at stake. But the next part is awesome. He says, but because you say so, I will let down the nets. Because you say so. Not because I think this is a good idea or I think this is a bad idea, but not because I think this will work out in my favor. Not because I think this would be a great story to tell my grandchildren if this thing works out. Not because you've been teaching, but because you've been teaching, I've been listening, and out of respect for you, I wouldn't do this for anybody else, but because you said it, and I respect you, I'll do it. We'll go let down the nets. If it will appease you, we'll go let down the nets. You said it, we'll go do it. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's going to happen. Let's do it. Imagine what hangs in the balance of Peter saying yes to take Jesus fishing. Everything about Peter's life, the reason you and I even know who Peter is weighted on the decision that Peter's going to make about taking Jesus fishing or not.